Okay, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about motivation over the retreat. At one point I was needing some direction in my practice, so I started to read this letter that Lama Tsongkhapa wrote to a person who actually was both a teacher and a student relationship with him. And it's often called a letter of practical advice on Sutta and Tantra, but I think his title is A Brief Indication of the Graded Stages of the Path. So I only got in the very beginning of the 30 pages because I was already like, okay, here's where I'm at. And so I've been kind of working on some of that stuff. But one of the things he said in there that really struck my mind, especially thinking about him talking to someone who he first praises. He just praises this person, a very learned person. But then he writes this thing in a way that I don't know if he was just speaking to him, but it seemed like it was for more than this one person. But at one point he says, therefore, first of all, before any Dharma practice, it's extremely important for our motivating thought to be one which we have properly worked ourselves up to, and not one that has simply come from mere words. So you think of that, saying that to some great teacher, by the way. So that's embedded in some parts where he first is preceding this with some verses from Nagarjuna's friendly letter, where he says, I think this is where he's talking to his friend, "Oh, you who are free from fears," person who's got some realizations maybe on board. "It's not necessary for me to tell you much." So this is Nagarjuna writing. "But this is an essential and beneficial piece of advice. Tame your mind." So, even, if you think about who they're speaking to, and then here we are, this is the beginning. This is how we begin our practice. And then the Buddha has said that the root of the mind is the root of Dharma practice. And then there's a verse from Aryadeva that supports this. I didn't care so much for the translation. I'll read the translation from this letter, but I went to another translation. So Aryadeva said in the 400 stanzas, "Because we cannot see any action such as going and so forth, becoming meritorious, and so on, except through the thought that immediately motivates it, the mind is therefore said to be first before all karmic actions." So another way that's said is, without intention, actions like going are not seen to have merit and so forth. In all actions, therefore, the mind should be understood as paramount. So it's basically getting to the point that both Nagarjuna and Aryadeva are saying that the mind is the root of right and wrong, essentially. And as Lama Tsongkhapa says, this is because it is definite that the channels for acting wrongly and engaging in what is right are in fact only three, which is like body, speech, and mind. And of these, the body and speech themselves are controlled by the mind. So then he says, you've got to get your motivation together and take some time to build it up. And then he goes into some ways to do that, and he launches into the three kind of motivations of the initial, middle, and great scope practitioner. But another way to do that, I think, is the 6 preparatory practices. And so I just I'll talk about those in my next BBC, but just introduce this in a very general way of when we do our practice sessions, there's always the 3 components of, as this is now from the Great Treatise, in the actual meditation session, it has 3 phases. It has the preparatory phase, the actual session, and the conclusion. So what we always think of as setting your motivation, doing the practice, and dedicating in a way, if you simplify it. So really, the preparatory phase is about these 6 preparatory practices, but which I think I'd like to talk about when I do my next BBC, because I think this is one way I find it helpful to work on my motivation. But in general, it's if you just think about it in a real general way and not worrying about those steps or anything or how you might use those steps, which I find quite useful, just think about when you sit down, why am I sitting here? What am I here to do? Just really, I think these broad questions, because if you practice daily, sometimes it gets rote and you start just reading things for your motivation and you haven't really set your motivation. You haven't really worked it up, is what he's saying. And so one year, some years ago, I would guess maybe 9 years ago, somewhere, I used to spend half of the session working on my motivation. And I asked Venerable about it, and she said, yeah, that's fine. Bring in the Lam Rim points. Work on your motivation, then do the practice. And I did that most of the retreat, and I thought, well, I'm not so sure about this. But she said, yeah, that's a good thing to do. And I found that to be helpful. And so, just asking these open-ended questions to ourselves, or maybe looking at what's going on in your mind and what you want to work on and making it kind of specific to what's happening. But wherever it comes around, you want to, in that time period, work yourself to the place where you're turning to the three jewels for refuge and generating bodhicitta. So you want to take however you work it around, to have this be a Buddhist meditation session, which is what I'm talking about here. You want to find a way to work with the material and come to that place. And I think that if we had ideas here from the group, I bet there would be as many ideas as there are people here about what that might look like, and it probably changes on a day-to-day basis. But I think the main point is make it real. Try to not just read. You can even read prayers and have the feeling there. You can use the sadhana, which sets, the way a sadhana is set out, it takes care of this for you in a sense. But you can only rely on that if you're actually with it. And that you can do if you take time. Like you can stop at, any of the very first prayers that open up a sadhana and then just say one line and spend time with that and use that as your motivation. Venerable's told me that as well because I've asked her about that. So there's a lot of ways to go about this. But you do need to make it your own and work it up. So that's the big point of today. Thanks for listening.